This video is sponsored by Frontier Wargaming. Keep watching for more details and a discount code. What's up people, my name is Liam, and welcome to the Millennial Model Mayhem content zone. Today I've got a cute little project that'll help me get back into the swing of painting after creating that Gamma Wolves battle report. That project just happens to be this Gundam artifact model kit. This box is from the first run of the series, which released in early 2021, and now I believe Series 3 will be releasing near the end of this year. The art is the same on each package, so the mobile suit you get inside is a random draw. I wonder which one I'm gonna get. As someone with a background in painting minis, this series from Bandai has always intrigued me, so I'm interested to see how it compares to both gunpla and minis. I've also got a fun idea for the color scheme, but I'm gonna get more into that later because I have one other thing I'm doing to help revitalize my painting energy. Thanks to sponsorship from Frontier Wargaming, I've been sent some of their handcrafted products to help me optimize my workspace. So allow me to take you on a tour. Hello people, I'm now doing the current studio setup tour because it looks a little different since the last one I did in 2021. So here's the box art slash poster background, and then right next to it we've got the makeshift stage, and then behind it is where we have the secondary desk, mostly for airbrushing. So here's the spray booth, which is used as a makeshift shelf when I'm not using it, with some paints, airbrushing supplies, other random stuff. And above, of course, we have the backlog. And then over here we've got the main desk. Random painting stuff everywhere. Put some figures. These paints here are just ones for current work in progress projects. And then we got some random painting supplies and photography, stationery stuff. And of course the BenQ lamp and arm for the streaming slash overhead camera setup. Now it's time to unwrap and see what Frontier Wargaming sent me. Their handcrafted products offer elegant and modular ways to help declutter your hobby zones. So to help me with that process, I've now got a custom engraved paint case 2.0, as well as their brand new tabletop paint station. My loadout included 3 wall shelves and 2 ladder and storage shelves. The only tool of my own I had to use was a rubber-tipped hammer, and everything else I may need to assemble and mount them came included. The portable paint station is definitely my favorite item here, and I can't deny there's some bias from seeing my logo engraved across the surface, but it's also just a really awesome painting accessory. In addition to having a compact LED lighting system, the modular tray system includes mini painting handles, paint storage, toolboxes, and even trays for minis that have magnets on the bases. They've also included their own wet palette, which I'll be using to help paint the artifact model. Even if I never take my painting supplies away from home, although I'm sure I'll have something like a road trip to bring this paint station on eventually, I can include it as part of the setup on the secondary airbrushing desk. It took a bit of experimenting with different layouts, but I personally find these kinds of organizational activities enjoyable. Almost all my tools and materials were stored in drawers before, so being able to move them all to the new shelves and toolboxes meant that I could repurpose the drawers into more deliberate storage areas. Can't deny that shuffling the layout of both desks and reorganizing all my hobby supplies was quite tiring, but it was well worth it. So let's take a look. The main desk here doesn't look too different, but as you can see I set up one of the wall shelves here with my Vallejo-sized bottles. And then this box is just tools that I use fairly often, like clippers, hobby knife, files. This here is not the intended purpose. It's kind of meant to have 2 of the wall shelves along it, but I thought it worked well in this space. And then the wires from the boom arm here have a gap that they can come up through underneath. So you can see we've got the 2 other wall shelves up here, and we put them on top of that kind of makeshift tray I had before because I like the storage area underneath. And I realized that the airbrush booth is collapsible, and I don't airbrush as often as I use the paintbrush, so I'll just have it collapsed and I can put the portable paint station in front of it and just close it up when I need to airbrush. And here are the other 2 ladder shelves. Some of the backlog. This one isn't that exciting, it's just a bunch of random stuff. Like this is a bag of empty paint bottles. This one looks a bit nicer. It's basing material and bases. And then in this one we've got, well, this is a bag of decals and stickers, but this one's all gunpla pieces. So it's the kit bashing graveyard. It looks a bit nicer now. And then in the top we got painting supplies, palettes, the mat, the nice brushes. And to wrap things up, here's the stuff I put in the toolboxes over here at the other desk. And I had a lot of fun rearranging and sorting all this stuff. And I'm pretty excited about the new studio. Thank you Frontier Wargaming for sponsoring my work. If you're interested in checking out some of their products for yourself, you can visit their website at frontierwargaming.com, and you can use code MMMayhem 2022 for 10 euros off any order of at least 100 euros. Now it's time to build this miniature-sized gunpla so I can paint it
like a miniature.
Well, after all those extremely tiny pieces, I can definitely say this Gundam artifact Nightingale was a bit of a nightmare to assemble. But overall, I still found it to be an interesting experience. It was clearly engineered by people who are used to designing gunpla kits, so I think they could have taken some notes from how tabletop gaming minis are designed, especially when it comes to the seam lines. The initial assembly was done without any glue, so there is some minor articulation to be had, but the whole thing is quite flimsy, and I knew that I would have to be gluing some parts of it in order to paint it the way I envisioned. With that being said, it's time to prepare it for painting. First task is to take everything apart and clean up the nub marks, which can mostly be done with careful use of a hobby knife. I'll be using sanding sponges for the final cleanup, but first I'm going to secure the extra flimsy pieces and take care of the major seam lines. Once the parts I identified as being at risk of detaching were secured with superglue, I took care of the seam lines with the same glue. I decided to use superglue over plastic cement this time because I wanted to speed up the process, and since this is a fun casual project, I'm only fixing the most obvious seam lines. I could definitely put in more time to fill in the smaller gaps, but it's so tiny that I personally don't mind leaving them there, and I'm eager to get to the brushwork. Once the superglue was cured, I grabbed the metal files to sand down the texture to be relatively smooth, then switched to the foam sanding blocks to finish off the areas. You can see here I just cut off a small strip from the 2000 grit one and attached it to a toothpick for more precise control. When the sanding was finished, I divided the parts into the fewest amount of sub-assemblies according to the areas that would be hard to get paint onto, then got the airbrush ready. Everything got a coat of good old Vallejo black surface primer to start, then according to the color scheme I got planned, which I'll explain shortly, I thinned down some Turbodork Ground is Lava shifter paint and applied it liberally to the underframe of the Nightingale. The color scheme I came up with for the Nightingale was the Wildberry Pop-Tart. I chose the shifter paint according to which one I had that looked the most like the jelly filling. My inspiration for this pastry-themed palette came from my friend and fellow painter, Sugar Candy Miniatures. Some of you may remember back in June when I painted this Gloomspite Gitz model for their Pride Month collaboration army. They've got the most delicious ideas when it comes to painting miniatures, such as Bunt the Troll, Frosto the Zote, Small Fry of the Fast Food Frights, and this orc army led by Zip-Poli da Whiska. Yes, he is standing on a stack of pancakes. We've also been doing some occasional joint streams lately where we each paint our own thing, talk about things like anime, and definitely some other stuff too. And as a matter of fact, I've recently converted them to the world of Gunpla, and they're now working on their own high-grade Gushin.
I get why people like building Gundams, because it doesn't f***ing suck. There's no glue involved, so you don't get sticky fingers, which f***ing sucks.
I highly recommend checking out their channel, so please visit the link in the description. Now, I've got a rectangle base that's just the right size for the Nightingale, and it's time to give it the Wildberry makeover. To start off the Pop-Tart, I lay down a 50-50 mix of snakebite leather and bone white for the base of the crust section. And once that's got 2 solid coats, I take pure bone white and roughly apply it over top to simulate the uneven texture. Next up is to create the icing layer, which I'm using royal purple and blue violet for. This is where I start using the Frontier Wargaming wet palette because it starts with the initial shape in royal blue, then I gradually mix up to a solid coat of blue violet with a subtle gradient along the edge to simulate just a bit of depth. After the purple icing is done, I move on to Mordian and Enchanted Blue to paint on the blue icing design of the pastry. The reference images I looked at didn't seem to have a uniform pattern for the icing, so I just copied one of the first ones I saw and figured that it would read as a Wildberry Pop-Tart either way. With the base completed, I take the same royal purple and Mordian blue along with black, and move on to the still separated parts of the Nightingale to block in the armor colors. My rationale is to have the ratio of blue to purple match the Pop-Tart, so the majority of the model will be purple, and I'm just using the black for the gun and cylinders at the rear. Then I'm using gunmetal and gunmetal blue to add a bit more variation to the metallics. The gunmetal is for all the thrusters and to create a bit more separation on the gun, while the gunmetal blue is just going on these circle areas and a few spots next to the shifter paint. Before fully reassembling the Nightingale and attaching it to a base, I decided to give everything a unifying black wash. But either due to the old Vallejo bottle, or maybe a reaction with the thinner I used to dilute the effect, or perhaps there was too much residual tap water on the brush, some of the pieces ended up with an ugly white residue. Thankfully, it was easy to fix with some Tamiya black panel liner, but either way, I think it's time to retire that particularly old bottle of black wash. It's like I always say, with that minor hiccup taken care of, I can now reassemble the model and carefully attach it to the Pop-Tart base with some superglue. Now it's time to dive right into the edge highlighting and glazing, my favorite. The first stage is to give the purple, black, and blue an initial edge highlight to outline all the relevant details. Each section uses an approximate 50-50 mix of their respective colors. The only new bottle being added to the mix is titanium white to make it gray with the black. When those initial edge highlights are done, I quickly fill in the thrusters with pure white, followed by Naphthol red light, because I'm planning on doing my usual glowing effect on these parts at the end. Now it's on to the final and longest stretch of painting where I finish off each section, starting with the metallics. I went back over the shifter paint sections with a gentle dry brush to ensure they were sparkling properly, and I decided to also apply this to the gunmetal blue sections because I thought having 3 different metallics was a little busy, and the dry brushing technique I used meant that there is still a bit of blue showing through to provide just a little bit of subtle variation. The gunmetal sections were dry brushed in the same manner with some silver mixed in. Now to finish up the non-metallics, I started with the black sections. My first edge highlights were hastily done, so I started by working up from pure black to have a more clean result. Like with my other projects, the black armor doesn't involve any glazing, just progressively thinner edge highlights. For finishing the blue armor, I'm going back to the Mordian and Enchanted Blue, but adding our friend Glaze Medium and Titanium White to the mix. This process starts with glazing in the gradient from shadow to highlight according to my theoretical light source overhead, followed by the same edge highlighting method I used on the black. I'm not going to do a detailed breakdown of my painting techniques on this project because it's essentially the same process that I've used with all my other hand-painted gunpla, so if you want a better explanation, I recommend you check out my playlists or this video that I released back in April. It even uses some of the same paints, like the royal purple and blue violet. Speaking of purples, it's time to finish off the last armor sections, which, as you probably guessed, involves the same techniques as the blue. So I'm going to take this moment to talk about the Frontier Wargaming wet palette. I had some trouble with the paper drying up too quickly at the beginning, but I quickly realized that was because the sponge wasn't wet enough. I've been using the Army Painter wet palette recently, which uses a different kind of sponge, so once I made this minor change I had no problems with the Frontier palette throughout the project. I like how the clear lid lets you see the paint so you can see if the environment's getting too moist and causing paint to become runny after leaving it closed for too long. I also find the smaller size useful for me specifically because I tend to have more than one project on the go, so now I can dedicate my larger palette to the big projects like regular gunpla and have this one available for smaller things like minis. Once the purple armor was done, I returned to the red thruster color to glaze in some basic glow effects. This was a straightforward process of working up to an almost pure white in the middle of the circular part, followed by a very thin glaze of red in the surrounding areas to simulate the spicy hot energy coming from inside the Nightingale. The very last thing was to use silver to give the corresponding metallic sections a single edge highlight to help sharpen up those details. Now allow me to present the Artifact Nightingale Wildberry Pop-Tart Edition. Despite the building process being more difficult than expected, this project was a lot of fun in different ways. I got to explore unhealthy snacks for my color scheme thanks to inspiration from sugar candy miniatures. I experienced a new kind of gunpla that was quite different, while also having familiar vibes due to the size, and I got to refresh my painting skills in preparation for my upcoming work, which is actually a very appropriate segue into the Sasabi commission that I'll be finishing up next. The Nightingale and the Sasabi are both piloted by our boy Char Aznable after all. Keep your eyes open for more live streams where I work on that much larger purple mobile suit. Want to know what's coming up next in the content zone? Then consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/MillennialModelMayhem, where in addition to finding out what projects I'm working on next, you can receive benefits such as HD wallpapers, direct messaging, and more. It's the best way to support my work. Just ask the Mayhem machines Bo, Moosepelheim, and Ryan, or the Gogg hand Dolfo and Janel. If you can't donate any money, you can also lend your support by using the like, comment, share, and subscribe buttons, visiting the affiliate links in the description, or following my social media pages. That's all for now, so I'll see you again next time in the Millennial Model Mayhem content zone.
The algorithm demands that you lock on notifications and annihilate the like and subscribe buttons. And leave a comment.